Welcome to Veiled Narrative Stories, where emotions are unveiled, love finds its second chance, and every silence speaks louder than words. Today's story is one that dances between heartbreak and destiny, a tale of quiet courage, unexpected connection, and the beautiful way love returns when we least expect it. The music swelled softly beneath the golden chandeliers, the air thick with perfume, laughter, and a kind of joy that didn't belong to her. Amara sat at the edge of the ballroom, her emerald dress shimmering under the light, a cruel reminder that she was still visible, still there, still watching her ex-boyfriend marry someone else. It wasn't supposed to hurt this much. She had told herself she'd moved on, but every glance at him, at Ethan, standing tall and glowing beside his bride, felt like a whisper of all the almosts they never became. She raised her champagne glass, hiding behind the glittering rim, trying to swallow the ache that settled in her chest. That's when she noticed someone watching her. Him. Nathan, the groom's older brother. The quiet one. The one who always stayed in the background at family dinners, offering her polite smiles but saying little. Now he was walking toward her, straight through the crowd, eyes never leaving hers. Her breath caught. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, voice low, calm, almost protective. "I didn't expect to feel this out of place," she admitted, her voice trembling with the effort of control. Nathan sat down beside her, his presence grounding. The noise of the celebration faded around them. "I saw the way you looked at him," he said quietly. "But I also see the way you're holding yourself together. That takes strength." His words struck deeper than she expected. No pity, no judgment, just understanding. The night stretched on. They talked about lost dreams, broken hearts, and the irony of fate. And when the first slow song began, Nathan extended his hand. "Come on," he said. "Let's give them something real to look at." She hesitated, then took it. Under the soft glow of chandeliers, they moved as if the world had forgotten to breathe. His hand at her waist was steady, his touch gentle yet sure. And in that moment she felt something shift. Not the pain fading, but the beginning of healing. By the end of the night, Ethan and his bride were long gone in their limousine of white roses. But Amara stayed, under the stars, beside Nathan, laughing for the first time in months. Maybe love wasn't lost. Maybe it had simply been waiting for her, in the eyes of the one person she never noticed before. And as dawn touched the sky, she realized, sometimes the ending we fear most is just the doorway to a better beginning. The golden glow of chandeliers shimmered over satin-draped tables, their reflections dancing in crystal glasses and polished silverware. Every detail in the grand ballroom seemed perfectly orchestrated. The scent of white lilies, the soft hum of the string quartet, the laughter that rose and fell like gentle waves of celebration. It was a night built for love, for beginnings, for joy. But for Amara, it was a night that felt like an echo of something lost, a hauntingly beautiful melody that once belonged to her. She sat at the farthest corner of the hall, her posture straight, her poise unbroken. Yet inside she was unraveling. Her emerald silk gown cascaded like liquid moonlight around her, and her hair, swept elegantly to one side, glowed in the warm amber light. To any onlooker, she was the perfect image of grace, calm, radiant, untouched. But her eyes told another story, a quiet storm that even mascara couldn't hide. Across the glittering dance floor, Ethan, the man who once promised her forever, stood hand in hand with another woman, his bride. He looked happy. His laughter, his easy smile. The softness in his eyes when he looked at her. All the things that used to be Amara's. She had spent months preparing herself for this day, convincing her heart that she could bear it, that she could walk into the very place where her dreams once lived and pretend she was fine. But as the vows replayed in her memory, every whispered, "I do," felt like a blade of glass pressing deeper into her chest. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her champagne glass, knuckles pale against the delicate crystal. She forced a smile as a few guests passed by, offering polite nods. She had mastered the art of appearing whole even while crumbling silently inside. Somewhere in the corner, the pianist shifted tunes, a soft, nostalgic piece that used to be their song. A song Ethan once played for her on rainy evenings when they shared a tiny apartment, when dreams were simple and love was enough. The sound filled the air like a memory she couldn't escape. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. "Don't break," she told herself. "Not here. Not now." When she opened them again, her gaze met a pair of eyes watching her from across the room. It was Nathan, Ethan's older brother, He stood beside the bar, tall, reserved, a quiet presence in a sea of celebration. His dark suit fit him like it had been crafted just for him, the faint stubble along his jaw catching the light as he tilted his head slightly, studying her. There was something about his expression, not pity, not curiosity, but understanding, as if he could see the storm she was hiding behind that composed smile. She looked away quickly, feeling her pulse quicken for reasons she couldn't name. Nathan had always been different, the quiet one, the one who rarely spoke during family dinners, who seemed to live more in his thoughts than in his words. But even back then, when she and Ethan were together, Nathan's gaze had always carried an unspoken gentleness, a subtle awareness, as though he saw what others missed. Now, seeing him across the room, his eyes fixed on her, it was both unsettling and strangely comforting. A laugh escaped her lips, low and brittle. "Look at me," she whispered under her breath, "the ex at her former lover's wedding. How poetic." But poetry has a cruel way of wrapping pain in beauty. As the night carried on, the noise around her became a blur. The clinking glasses, the congratulations, the speeches. She stared at Ethan only once more, just long enough to let go, to release the version of herself who believed they were meant to last forever. Her heart whispered goodbye, not in bitterness, but in acceptance, because sometimes letting go is the most elegant act of love. And yet, she didn't know that this very moment, this act of silent strength, was being noticed. Nathan, still standing by the bar, watched as she straightened her shoulders, lifted her glass, and smiled toward the couple as the room erupted in applause. That smile, fragile, brave, luminous, stirred something within him. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't desire. It was recognition. He saw himself in her heartbreak, the quiet endurance, the grace beneath the ache. As the lights dimmed and the first dance began, Amara rose from her chair. Her gown whispered against the marble floor as she walked toward the balcony, drawn by the need for air, for solitude. Behind her, laughter continued. But ahead, the night sky opened wide, jeweled with stars. She leaned on the railing, the cool air brushing her skin, and exhaled. The city stretched below like a sea of lights, indifferent, infinite, breathtaking. For the first time that evening, she allowed a single tear to fall. It glimmered under the moonlight, sliding down her cheek like liquid crystal, before vanishing into the silk folds of her dress. It was then, in that quiet surrender, that she heard footsteps behind her, slow, deliberate. She turned, her eyes meeting his once more. Nathan, the man who had watched her pain from across the room, now stood before her, as if drawn by something deeper than mere concern, and though neither spoke, the air between them changed, soft, charged, inevitable. That moment, that quiet collision of two wounded hearts, was the beginning of everything neither of them knew they'd been waiting for. The night air was cool against Amara's flushed skin, scented with jasmine and rain-soaked roses from the garden below. From the ballroom behind her, laughter spilled through the open glass doors, elegant and effervescent, as if the universe itself was celebrating a love she no longer belonged to. She stood at the balcony's edge, her hands gripping the railing, her heart trying to remember how to breathe. Inside, the chandelier lights shimmered across polished marble, and the newlyweds, her ex and his new bride, floated gracefully across the dance floor like a vision from a dream she could never return to. For a moment, she allowed herself to drift, to imagine that maybe, in another life, it had been her hand in his, that the vows he whispered had been meant for her. But dreams are fragile things. They dissolve quickly in the face of truth, and the truth was standing right there, laughing softly with his bride while Amara stood outside, alone beneath the indifferent stars. She inhaled deeply, willing the ache in her chest to soften. "You're fine," she told herself again, a silent mantra she had repeated all evening. "You're fine. You're stronger than this." And then, she heard it, the low rustle of footsteps behind her. Slow, steady, deliberate. She turned, and there he was, Nathan, the groom's brother, the man who had spent most of the night at a distance, observing rather than celebrating. He stood in the doorway, one hand resting lightly in his pocket, the other holding a glass of bourbon that glowed amber beneath the candlelight. His tuxedo fit him with effortless precision, sharp lines softened by the quiet strength in his stance. But it wasn't the suit, or his striking composure, that caught her breath. It was his eyes, deep, steady, unreadable, fixed entirely on her. "Beautiful night," he said, his voice smooth as velvet, breaking the silence with a calm gentleness. Amara blinked, startled not by his words but by the way they seemed to care. It is, she replied softly, though her tone carried a fragile edge. For some more than others. Nathan's lips curved slightly. Not a smile, but something close. You didn't seem like you were enjoying the celebration. I wasn't aware I was supposed to, she said, the faintest bitterness lacing her voice. Then, realizing how it sounded, she sighed. Sorry. That was unfair. He shook his head. No need. You've earned the right to feel whatever you feel tonight. His words landed heavier than she expected. Not out of sympathy, but truth. There was something disarming about the way he said it, as if he had seen through every wall she had so carefully built. For a few long seconds, they stood in silence, the city lights flickering below them like distant stars. The breeze lifted a strand of her hair, brushing it across her cheek, and before she could tuck it back, Nathan stepped closer, his movements slow, deliberate and unbearably gentle. May I? He asked softly, his fingertips brushing that errant strand aside. His touch was brief, almost reverent, yet it sent a quiet tremor through her entire being. She looked up at him then, really looked. Beneath his composed exterior was something she hadn't noticed before. A quiet depth, a certain gravity. Where Ethan's charm had been loud and golden, Nathan's was subtle, like a dark flame that drew you closer without asking. Why are you out here? She asked, her voice quieter now, more curious than cautious. He tilted his head, studying her. Maybe for the same reason you are. Sometimes being inside feels like pretending. Her lips parted in silent surprise. That simple sentence felt like an echo of her own thoughts. So you came out to avoid pretending, she said softly. He gave a faint chuckle. I came out because I saw you leave. That admission hung between them, unexpected, electric. Amara blinked, unsure what to say. You noticed. How could I not? His voice dropped slightly, rich with quiet conviction. You were the only one in that room who wasn't smiling, and yet somehow, you looked like the only person who didn't need to. She laughed, soft, incredulous. That's a poetic way of saying I looked miserable. He smiled faintly. No, you looked real. The word lingered, sinking deep into the places where her self-worth had begun to crumble. It wasn't flattery, it was recognition. They talked for a while, not about the wedding, not about Ethan, but about things that mattered and things that didn't. About travel, about books, about how people fall apart and find ways to rebuild. Each word flowed effortlessly, as if the night itself was conspiring to draw them closer, and somewhere in the midst of their quiet exchange, Amara realized something startling. She was smiling again. Not the forced, polite smile she had worn all evening, but one that reached her eyes. Nathan watched her closely, a hint of warmth softening his usually composed expression. There it is, he murmured. There what is? She asked, teasing lightly. That smile. His voice deepened just slightly. It suits you far more than the silence. The air thickened, pulsing softly with unspoken emotion. A strand of moonlight curved between them, glinting on her jeweled earrings, outlining the elegant slope of her neck. She felt the world shrink, the latter inside fading into distance, the city below melting into blur. For the first time in months, Amara didn't feel like someone's ex, someone's regret. She felt seen. Nathan set his glass aside, his eyes never leaving hers. You shouldn't have had to face this night alone, he said quietly. I chose to come, she whispered. Maybe, he said, stepping just close enough that she could feel the quiet warmth radiating from him. But maybe you also needed someone to remind you that endings can be beautiful too. And under that vast canopy of stars, her heart, bruised but not broken, began to stir again, not in the desperate, aching way it once did, but softly, like a dawn rising after the longest night. The unexpected presence of Nathan had changed something. She didn't know what yet, only that her story, the one she thought had ended in heartbreak, was quietly beginning again. The night had deepened into that timeless hour where music softens, laughter dims, and hearts begin to whisper truths they've long hidden. Inside the ballroom, the air shimmered with the scent of roses and champagne. But for Amara, everything blurred into a slow motion of light and sound. She had spent most of the evening avoiding the dance floor, hiding behind her composure like a fragile silk veil. Nathan had remained beside her since their conversation on the balcony. Not too close, not intrusive, but present. His presence felt steady, grounding, like the quiet rhythm beneath a song. Now, as the final melody of the night began, the lights dimmed into a honey gold glow, and the first notes of a slow waltz drifted through the air, soft, elegant, and impossibly tender. Couples began to gather under the chandelier, their laughter fading into whispers. Amara's heart trembled. Their first dance. Ethan and his new bride glided into the center of the floor, perfectly radiant. Applause followed them like stardust. Amara tried to look away, but her gaze lingered, not on him, but on what they represented, the end of what she once believed was her forever. Nathan watched her quietly, his eyes searching hers, not for weakness, but for strength. He could see it, that internal battle between dignity and pain, and when her fingers tightened slightly around her clutch, he made a decision. He extended his hand toward her. "Dance with me," he said softly. Amara blinked, startled. "Nathan, no. Not here. Les." "Here," he replied, his tone gentle but unwavering. "You deserve a moment of your own tonight, not as someone's past, but as yourself." His words slid through her defenses like silk, quiet yet undeniable. Around them, couples moved gracefully, laughter mingling with melody. For a moment, she hesitated, afraid, exposed, unsure. But then she looked into his eyes. They held no pity, only patience, only quiet respect. And slowly she placed her hand in his. His palm was warm, steady. His fingers enveloped hers with a care so subtle it felt like a vow. As he led her toward the dance floor, whispers rose in the background, curiosity, surprise. But neither of them cared. The world could watch, it no longer mattered. The music swelled, and he drew her closer. Not too close, but enough for her to feel his heartbeat align with hers. It was steady, rhythmic, grounding. Her breath hitched as his other hand settled lightly at her waist, his touch both protective and electric. For a long moment, they didn't speak. Their movements were slow, in sync, effortless. The rhythm wasn't just in the music, it was in the way their souls seemed to recognize each other's scars. "You're trembling," Nathan murmured, his voice low and velvety against the music. "I'm not used to being seen," she whispered. He looked down at her, his gaze tender. "You've always been seen, Amara. You just forgot what it felt like." Her throat tightened. She turned her face slightly away, afraid that if she looked at him any longer, her heart might betray her composure. But Nathan's hand lifted gently, his fingers brushing against her chin, guiding her back to meet his eyes. "Don't look away," he said softly. "Not tonight." The music carried them through the moment, and she felt something shift deep within her. Not the sharp ache of loss, but the soft pulse of awakening. For months, she had believed her heart was ruined, a relic of what was. But here, in the warmth of Nathan's arms, she felt it beat again. The air between them grew warmer, charged with something unspoken yet real. The scent of his cologne mingled with her perfume, sandalwood and jasmine, weaving a scent as intoxicating as the moment itself. Her body relaxed, her mind quieted. Every step, every sway, every breath became a silent confession of everything she hadn't been able to say. Nathan leaned closer, his breath brushing her ear. "Do you remember when you first met me?" She smiled faintly. "You barely spoke. I was too busy watching the way you looked at my brother," he said with a half smile. "I thought no one could ever love like that, with that kind of fire." When Amara's smile faded slightly. "And now, he murmured, eyes locking on hers, "I realized the fire wasn't his to keep. It was yours all along." Something inside her unraveled, not painfully, but beautifully, like silk slipping from its knot. She rested her head against his shoulder, eyes closing. For the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself be held. No expectations, no explanations, just presence. The world around them faded. The guests, the lights, even the newlyweds. There was only the music, their quiet breathing, and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, broken hearts could still dance. When the final note lingered in the air, Nathan didn't release her hand right away. His thumb traced slow circles against her palm, wordless reassurance in the gentlest form. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For reminding me that endings don't mean I stop existing." He smiled softly. "No, Amara. Endings mean you start becoming who you were always meant to be." She looked up, eyes shimmering beneath the dim lights. In his gaze she didn't see rescue or romance. She saw something rarer, recognition. As they stepped off the floor, she felt lighter. The music faded, but the memory of that dance stayed, not as a performance but as healing. The dance wasn't about forgetting Ethan. It was about forgiving herself. About remembering that love doesn't only belong to the past. Sometimes, it's quietly waiting in the eyes of someone who walks beside you, not ahead of you. And though neither of them said it aloud, Both knew that something had begun that night, something unexpected, something true. The ballroom had begun to fade into a blur of laughter, fading perfume, and half-finished glasses of champagne. Most of the guests had drifted away to their tables or the garden terrace, but Amara and Nathan lingered near the edge of the dance floor, suspended in a quiet space that felt untouched by the noise around them. Their dance had ended, but the moment had not. It lingered, shimmering between them like starlight refusing to fade with dawn. Nathan guided her gently toward the open terrace, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back, not possessive, but reassuring. The night air was cool, brushed with the scent of roses and rain. The world beyond the glass doors seemed far away now, distant and muted, as though they had stepped into a softer, slower reality. Amara exhaled deeply, the tightness in her chest finally loosening. "You must think I'm foolish," she said quietly. "Coming here, sitting through all of this. I should have just stayed home." He leaned against the stone railing, watching her with calm, unhurried eyes. "No," he said after a pause. "I think you're brave." She laughed softly, though it trembled. "Brave, for torturing myself, for choosing to face what hurts," he replied. "Most people run from it. But you came here, held your head high, and looked pain in the eye. That's not foolish. That's courage wearing a beautiful dress." The words disarmed her. They felt different from anything she'd heard before. Not the rehearsed sympathy of well-meaning friends, not the polite pity that people cloak in kindness. His voice carried no agenda, no desire to fix her, only to see her. She turned her gaze toward the garden below, where strings of fairy lights glowed like fallen constellations. "It's strange," she murmured. "You think you've moved on, until you see them standing there, promising forever to someone else." "Did you love him that deeply?" Nathan asked, his tone gentle, careful. Amara hesitated. "I loved who I thought he was," she said finally. "Or maybe I loved the version of myself I was when I was with him, naive, hopeful, fearless. It wasn't the love that broke me, Nathan. It was the silence that followed it." Nathan nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Silence can be louder than betrayal. It's what echoes after everything else fades. She turned to look at him. "You speak like someone who's been there." A faint smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe I have," he admitted quietly. Different story, same ache. For a while, they stood without words, two souls wrapped in unspoken understanding. The world around them felt painted in gold and shadow, the night sky a velvet canopy above. Then Nathan spoke again, his voice softer. "When Ethan told me he was getting married, I didn't think about him first. I thought about you." Amara looked at him in surprise. "About me?" He nodded, eyes still on the horizon. "I wondered how it would feel. To be invited to something that once belonged to your heart. To sit there, watching your past make promises you once believed in." Her breath caught. "And what did you think?" He looked at her then, his gaze steady, unwavering. "I thought you'd survive it, because people like you always do. You feel deeply, but you never let pain turn you bitter." A silence followed, not awkward, but full of meaning, the kind of silence where two hearts recognize each other's rhythm. Amara's voice trembled when she spoke. "You make it sound like you've been watching me all along." And Nathan smiled faintly. "Maybe I have." The admission hung between them like the scent of rain before a storm, quiet, charged, inevitable. Amara turned toward him fully now, her emerald dress catching the soft light. "Why? Why me?" His answer was simple, but it carried the weight of truth. "Because even when you were breaking, you still carried yourself with grace. Because in a world full of noise, you have a way of being silent and still being heard." Her eyes shimmered, reflecting both the moonlight and the emotion that now threatened to spill. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. "Not tonight." "Why not?" he asked gently. "Because it makes me feel something I shouldn't." Nathan took a slow step closer, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "Maybe what you shouldn't feel is exactly what you need to." The words melted into the night air, wrapping around them like silk. The distance between them dissolved until she could feel the quiet thrum of his heartbeat. For a fleeting second, the world ceased to exist. There was no wedding, no past, no heartbreak, only the steady pulse of connection between two people who had found solace in each other's pain. Amara finally looked up, her voice breaking the hush. "Nathan, what are we doing?" He smiled softly, the corners of his eyes warm. "We're talking," he said simply. And sometimes talking is where healing begins. The simplicity of it undid her. A tear escaped, gliding down her cheek like a pearl. Nathan reached out, brushing it away with his thumb. A touch so gentle it felt sacred. "You don't have to be strong right now," he murmured, "not with me." Her eyes fluttered closed as his words sank in. "And what if I fall apart? Then I'll be there," he said. "Not to catch you, just to remind you that you can stand again." That was the moment she knew. Healing didn't always arrive as solitude. Sometimes, it came in the shape of someone who simply refused to walk away when your silence grew too heavy to carry alone. They stood there long after the music had faded, saying nothing, because everything that mattered had already been said. The night had woven something between them, fragile yet undeniable. A promise not of love yet, but of something more sacred, understanding. And for the first time since her heart had shattered, Amara didn't feel broken. She felt seen. The night had grown still. The echoes of laughter and clinking glasses had faded, leaving only the gentle hum of the city below and the distant whisper of music that lingered like a fading memory. Inside the grand ballroom, only scattered candlelight remained, a few flickering flames reflecting in empty wine glasses and forgotten bouquets. Amara stood at the edge of the marble terrace, her gown flowing like liquid emerald beneath the moonlight. The air was cool, wrapping around her bare shoulders like a secret. She had spent the entire evening confronting the ghosts of her past. And now, as the celebration waned, it felt as though something inside her had quietly been reborn. Behind her, Nathan approached, slow, unhurried, his footsteps echoing softly against the stone floor. He carried no grand gestures, no promises wrapped in eloquence. Just presence, steady, patient, certain. "You didn't have to stay this long," he said gently, standing beside her. Amara turned, her lips curving into a faint, knowing smile. "I think I needed to," she whispered. "For closure, for peace." Nathan studied her in silence for a moment, his gaze calm but thoughtful. "And did you find it?" She looked out toward the city lights, each one a glimmering reminder that life continued, endlessly, beautifully, no matter who left or who stayed. "I think peace isn't something we find," she said softly. "It's something we finally stop running from." Nathan smiled faintly. "You sound wiser than you were a few hours ago." She laughed, the sound light and warm. "Maybe that's what happens when you let go." A quiet wind swept through, stirring the loose strands of her hair. Nathan reached out instinctively, tucking one behind her ear. His fingers brushed her skin, gentle, reverent, and for a heartbeat, time stilled. Her eyes lifted to his. The moment stretched, soft, fragile, charged with everything that hadn't been spoken. "You don't have to be alone anymore," Nathan said quietly, his tone deep and sincere. Amara smiled sadly. "I'm not afraid of being alone. I'm afraid of never feeling something real again." He took a slow step closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. "Then don't chase what's gone. Let what's real find you." Her breath caught. There was no declaration, no rush, just truth. And somehow that truth was more intimate than any confession could have been. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive, filled with possibility, with beginnings that didn't need to be named. Amara turned to face him fully, her eyes shimmering with the reflection of moonlight. "You know," she said softly, "I came here tonight thinking I was saying goodbye to love. But maybe I was just saying goodbye to a version of it that wasn't meant for me." And Nathan's lips curved slightly. "Maybe love isn't something we lose," he murmured. "Maybe it just changes its shape, waiting for us to be ready to see it again." His words settled into her heart like poetry. For the first time, the ache inside her didn't hurt, it glowed. They stood there for a long time, neither rushing the moment nor defining it. There was beauty in the uncertainty, in the fragile space between endings and beginnings. The world around them had quieted into a soft symphony. The rustle of leaves, the hum of distant music, the steady rhythm of their breaths intertwining. When Nathan finally reached for her hand, it wasn't an invitation. It was a promise. His fingers brushed hers gently, then intertwined, warm and sure. Amara didn't pull away. Instead, she let herself lean into the feeling. The quiet warmth of connection, the subtle safety of being seen, the peace of not having to pretend anymore. The city below sparkled like scattered diamonds, and for the first time in a long while she didn't feel small beneath it. She felt infinite. Nathan turned to her, his gaze soft but steady. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to believe that some stories end too soon. but now I think maybe they end exactly when they're meant to, so that something better can begin." Amara looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "And what if we're the beginning?" He smiled, slow, deliberate, beautiful. "Then I'd say it's about time." A single tear slipped down her cheek, not from sadness but release. Nathan caught it with his thumb, his touch tender as moonlight. In that instant, everything, the heartbreak, the silence, the unanswered questions, ceased to matter. All that remained was the quiet truth between them that healing doesn't always come in solitude. Sometimes it walks toward you in the most unexpected form, wearing a tuxedo, carrying a steady heart, and seeing you as you've never seen yourself. The last of the candles flickered out inside, and dawn began to stretch its pale fingers across the horizon. The night, which had started in heartbreak, was now surrendering to light, to renewal. Amara leaned her head against Nathan's shoulder, her voice soft as a sigh. "You know what's strange?" "What?" he asked. "I came to watch someone else's love story," she murmured, smiling faintly. "And somehow I found the beginning of my own." And Nathan's hand tightened gently around hers. "That's how life works," he whispered. "The endings we dread often carry the seeds of the beginnings we deserve." They stayed like that as the first light touched the sky, silent, still, whole. The city stirred below, the promise of a new day awakening with the dawn. And somewhere between the remnants of yesterday and the hope of tomorrow, two souls, both broken once, began again. Not with fireworks, not with vows, but with quiet understanding and the kind of love that begins not in a rush but in peace. As dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and gold, the echoes of the wedding faded into a soft memory, a night that began in heartbreak and ended in revelation. What started as Amara's quiet surrender to her past became an unexpected journey toward healing, closure, and rediscovery. She had walked into that ballroom as a woman weighed down by the remnants of yesterday. The ache of a love that had once felt infinite but had turned into something unreachable. She came only to witness an ending, to bow gracefully before the ghosts that had haunted her heart. But fate, in its quiet elegance, had written something different for her. A new chapter disguised within the ashes of an old one. Nathan, the groom's brother, entered her story not like a storm, but like dawn after a long night. His presence didn't demand, didn't chase, didn't promise fairy tales. He simply was. Steady, kind, unafraid of her silence. In the midst of her sorrow, he offered not rescue, but recognition. The rare comfort of someone who saw her, not as the broken girl sitting alone at a wedding, but as a woman learning to breathe again. Their story wasn't born of grand gestures or whispered vows beneath chandeliers. It unfolded through moments of stillness, a conversation beneath moonlight, a shared glance that said more than words could, a single touch that carried warmth enough to heal what was wounded. Love, as Amara came to realize, wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it arrived quietly, patient, deliberate, waiting for the right heart to be ready. By the end of that night, something in her had shifted. The pain hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined her. It had transformed into wisdom, grace, and the soft courage to open her heart once more. Nathan's hand in hers wasn't a replacement for what she lost, it was a reminder of what still awaited her. Love not as fantasy, but as peace. The city beyond the terrace glimmered with infinite lights, each one a story, a beginning, a heartbeat. And in that expanse, Amara found her place again. She understood now that closure doesn't come from forgetting the past, but from accepting it, and letting it teach you how to love better, softer, truer. When Nathan looked at her that morning, with the gentle certainty of a man who had found something rare, she finally smiled, not for the past she'd endured, but for the future quietly unfolding before her. Because sometimes life doesn't give you what you asked for. It gives you what you needed to become whole again. And so, beneath the fading stars and the promise of a new sunrise, Amara's story began. Not with the man she once loved, but with the one who walked toward her when everyone else looked away. It was never the ending of a love story. It was the beginning of the right one. 2.